Hello, my name's Ben,
And my name's Josh.
and welcome back to FPL graduates, and welcome back to another game week guide. It was a crazy game week last week with Haaland triple captainers, wildcarders, and free hitters. So there was a lot of changes last week. We're dealing with the fallouts of that now. A lot has happened, a lot of rank climbs, a lot of rank falls in some cases as well. We're going to go through some of the key questions that you've been asking ahead of next game week and going through really, the dilemmas that you have ahead of this game week.
Indeed. So first of all, we're going to go through a few players that there's questions around, or should I sell this asset, etc., etc. So João Pedro has definitely surfaced quite a bit in the questions over on Instagram. A reminder: if you do want to get your questions answered, I just pick the best ones basically. So get over to Instagram. Usually on a Tuesday morning, Monday night, I'll put up a poll, and then people can ask away. So yeah, that's how you get your questions answered. João Pedro's up first. A lot of people are asking whether they should sell him. Obviously, back to back. Well, I think three in a row blanks actually. With only one shot in those three games. I think the massive caveat you've got to realise here is that Chelsea have been down to 10 men in probably half of the Brighton game, and then almost entirely in that United game. So it's not an ideal circumstance, obviously, for owners. He's super high owned as well, so it's the idea that you can maybe go against him if he's underperforming and then chase a differential, which is exciting. But for me, I probably will be holding at the moment. Liverpool at home's a fine fixture. Liverpool defensively have shown that they're quite frail at the back so far this season. Equally, Nottingham Forest aren't great defensively either, and I wouldn't be necessarily tying too much hope to Sunderland's defensive record so far. I want to see them against better calibre opposition before we start making any judgments on their defence. So yeah, overall for that three, I think I'm pretty happy keeping him. What's your thoughts on him, Ben?
Yeah, pretty similar for myself, of course. Not ideal that he's not, really managed to get any shots at all on goal in that time period. But again, during that sort of small sample size of games that we saw extenuating circumstances that we don't see over a longer period of time. So the goals and assists that he got in the first part of the season, of course, is what we've got to sort of take into account as well. You look at it, it evens out. If you were considering selling an asset with 2 goals and 3 assists in the first few game weeks of a season, with some decent stats, some decent involvement, and minute security, I don't think anyone will be selling. It's because of the recency bias. People are thinking that. I don't think there's any need to sell him at the moment.
Yeah, definitely agreeing on that one then. Next up is Tosin. Obviously, it was confirmed before the deadline last week that he is going to be out until hopefully, well, he'll hopefully be back after the international break, which is only after this game week 7, so not very long at all. I myself have kept him. He's at 4.4 million. I think he dropped last week, which isn't the end of the world for someone who, for me personally, I'd be keeping for quite a while now that I've wildcarded already. And he gives you access to one of the better defences of last season, although albeit this season they are ranking 10th for expected goals conceded. But again, super small sample size. They've had 10 men for, what was it, 1.5 of those games, so you can't really take too much against it. What I would say is that he's almost a certain starter, just judging by the performances that they've had without him. He's been super important to them, and they've looked worse when he has been out. So for me, he's definitely a hold. Obviously, Ben, I don't think you own him. What would you do in a neutrals position?
No, I think it's very much dependent on what sort of bench coverage that you do have. If you have decent bench coverage, then it's easy to bench him. Whereas if you do have, some cheap players that, like a Burnley defender or something like that, where you're not confident on the alternatives you've got on the bench, then that might be the case where you would look to sell. But for me, in most cases and scenarios, I wouldn't be looking at necessarily selling Tosin, just given he's only going to be out really for another game week.
Indeed, and then the final player that's sort of on the edge of getting out of people's teams is Cody Gakpo. I did sell him last week, but it was more of a case to fund my other moves. It weren't a case that I wanted to really get rid of him. Obviously, he was benched last game week, and he starts in the Champions League on Tuesday night against Galatasaray, which sort of would maybe indicate that the minutes at the weekend against Chelsea could be at least hampered somewhat. It's going to be interesting though, because against Palace when he was benched, he did come on at half time, which I think shows, well, they were trailing, which is obviously a bit of context, but it does show that he is important to them if he's being brought on so quickly, which I would say. On the left side, I don't think anyone is natural in that position other than Cody Gakpo. We saw that with Wirtz. I don't think he's really that natural out there. I don't expect Isak and Ekatike to play out there, to be quite honest. They've played out there a handful of times between them in their careers. So it's one of those where I feel like he is probably the best option for Liverpool out there. And if they are playing their best team, he's going to be in it week in, week out. So, yeah, what's your thoughts, Ben? Would you think the minutes there are secure, or do you think we'll be seeing some benching, some starts?
I wouldn't say it's secure at the moment. I think he's been one of the best performing Liverpool assets, but I still think Arne Slot's trying to work out what the best system is to play, which is why we're seeing some benchings here and there for Gakpo. He's seen, Salah get benched on Tuesday night as well. So we are seeing Slot work out what his best front four is going to be. So in the short term, I'd actually look at selling. There's a lot of unknown. I do think once the fixtures swing back in Liverpool's favour, what's that, around game week 11, 12, we're going to have such a better sort of indication on what Slot thinks is that strongest front four, and then we'll know from there whose minutes are more secure. I think it's a case we're going to find out over the next few weeks. I can see you making a case for keeping him, but for me, I think sell him for now whilst there's unknown sort of elements of minutes, and then, you very much could be in a position where you go, actually, he is getting the minutes, let's bring him back in when those fixtures get a little bit better for Liverpool.
Yeah, 100%. So looking at some midfield alternatives then, we've gone for sort of 6.5 million and below, just to maybe save some money in the bank. There's not too many assets around 7.5 million anyway that I'd be diving into right now. So here's some of the best of the bunch at the moment then. So we've got Ismaila Sarr from Crystal Palace, obviously back from injury against Liverpool and was fantastic yet again. He's one of these guys that you could probably hold throughout the whole season and you'll probably pick up a decent return off him, week by week. He's just so consistent. We saw it last season as well. Obviously, the 3 goals so far this season is great. He's been involved in 4 big chances, which is, I think, joint third for the most in the Premier League out of midfielders. So, yeah, I quite like him. He's a bit of a discount price at 6.4 million, obviously due to the injury and people selling. What's your thoughts on him, Ben?
Yeah, really, really good value. Highlighted him at the start of the season as one to, definitely keep an eye out on. And look, he's had an injury so far this season, which is not ideal, but him being back and still sort of having the goals, the XG and everything like that in the minutes that we're seeing so far, albeit a small sample size, really good indication. And Palace look very, very good going forwards. Ismaila Sarr is absolutely key to all of that. So for me, I think he's a really good long-term pick, not just one sort of to look at in the short term.
Yeah, indeed. The only sort of con that I can think of with Sarr and Palace assets in general is obviously that Conference League games that they're not really used to, and also I don't think the squad depth is capable enough to last the whole season at the current rate that they're going. So that's just something to think about. Potential rotation there, depending on the opponent. I'd imagine the minutes would be lesser in the Conference League than in the Premier League, but it's just a little question mark on any team that's basically involved in Europe, especially the ones that are playing on the Thursdays. Someone who doesn't have, obviously, any European commitments is Iliman Ndiaye for Everton. I brought him in last week. There was obviously the blank against West Ham, which is unfortunate. He is a decent asset and has proven that so far this season as well. See, the 2 goals and the 1 assist so far. He's also picked up DEFCON in a couple of appearances as well, which is nice considering he's basically a winger. He was quite close to it as well against West Ham. Palace at home, City away and Tottenham at home. It's a bit of a trickier one. Obviously, Man City should be in red and not green. I think there is a chance there. Like, just because David Moyes is the manager, it just makes me think that he gives belief to Everton and that like any game they go in they can get a result out of. So yeah, it wouldn't shock me at all if they pick up maybe a win, a draw and a loss in those 3. I could easily see that coming. What's your thoughts on Ndiaye, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, I can sort of see why there is a decent appeal for Ndiaye because, his stats haven't looked too bad to start the season and he's looked pretty decent on the eye test. And look, he does have many routes to points as well, which I think's a decent sort of opportunity there. I think I do lean more towards Ismaila Sarr, despite sort of Everton not having the European commitment. We'll see really sort of a true test of Everton over the next couple of weeks on how they get on against Palace, City and Tottenham because, those in theory are sort of fairly difficult fixtures. So yeah, for me, I think he's a decent option and one that's going to be fairly popular amongst those engaged managers.
Indeed. And then the final midfielder is even cheaper than those guys. It's Jadon Anthony at 5.6 million. Obviously, he is hot off the press starting the season. 4 goals and an assist so far. Almost talismanic for Burnley so far this season. He's been, I think, involved in 60 or 70% of their goals total, which is absolutely mental. That will not sustain throughout the season, but it just goes to show how important he is to their team. Villa away, Leeds at home, and Wolves away. I actually think it's a very nice 3. Aston Villa ranks second bottom for expected goals conceded so far this season. Only Burnley are worse defensively, so I think we can hope for some goals in that fixture this weekend. After the break as well, you've got Leeds at home and then Wolves away. Obviously, Leeds are decent defensively so far, but it's a newly promoted side, and that's going to be an interesting game because both sides are going to need to pick up points against each other. And then obviously Wolves have been poor. They looked a bit better against Spurs, but I wouldn't hang my hat on that so far this season with their performances. What's your thoughts, Ben, on Anthony? Do you think it's one of those sort of breakout players that no one really should jump on, or do you think there's actually some potential there?
There's potential there, but it always makes me nervous going for an attacking player from a promoted side, which is probably the reason why I'll steer a little bit clear, because I don't think Burnley are going to sustain, or Anthony's going to sustain those numbers over a longer sample size period of time. It very well may be that we've missed the boat a little bit with this one by a couple of weeks. And look, that's not an issue at all because he's so low owned as well that it's not the biggest concern. So for me, I think he's an option. Whether he's going to be a sustainable option in the long term, I think probably not. This is, you're looking at a 2 or 3 game week fix until this purple patch runs over, I think.
Yeah, indeed. We're going to check out some of the £5 million midfielders, should I say. Now, I've ranked them 1 to 6 in what I think currently going into game week 7 is the sort of the best pick. So this is in counting fixtures as well as their overall performance as well. James Garner is first, and he sort of surprised when I was looking at the £5 million midfielders. He really shocked me with how consistent his returns have been. He's picked up bonus in 2 games. One of the games he didn't even have a return in. He picks up Defcon fairly frequently as well. He gets assists because he's on some set pieces, similar to Dewsbury Hall as well. And also he had, I think, 5 shots in total against West Ham the other night when he was playing in midfield, which I expect him to play in again, obviously with Dewsbury Hall being suspended for game week 7. So yeah, for me, he's top of the charts at the moment. I really like him. He's super differential as well. One that's not been spoken about in the community yet. I think pretty much most of them on this list have been. Sean Longstaff is second. He's got better DEFCON potential than Stacks. That's why he creeps above Stack a couple of places. And obviously he's shown that he could have that high ceiling last week against Bournemouth with that goal and assist. I wouldn't expect that week in, week out, but 4.9 million, it's even cheaper than Stack as well. Granit Xhaka's in there as well. He's fairly consistent with the DEFCONs, obviously on some set pieces as well. Similar sort of situation to Garner and Dewsbury Hall. And obviously for that Sunderland team, if you think that they can continue with their good results, then he's definitely a good pick to get. And then Josh Cullen as well. We just mentioned about Jadon Anthony's good fixtures. They're not too bad for Josh Cullen either. He obviously returned earlier on in the season for a double-digit haul. I believe he could be on penalties as well. Not 100% sure on that, but there is potential there, and obviously DEFCON potential pretty much on all of these. I think the worst ones are probably Dewsbury Hall and Stack for DEFCON. That's why Dewsbury Hall is at the bottom, because you are relying on his attacking output mainly to get you some points. Whereas I feel like if I had to play someone, if they had to come in on the odd week where it's maybe not an ideal fixture, I think I'd prefer to play any of those guys above. Is there anything that you'd change on that list, Ben, obviously going into this week?
Yeah, I mean, there's the options are there's quite a lot of them, and
Loads.
I think this player at 5 million you're going to have to sort of sub in and out on a fairly weekly basis. I mean, if you are looking at other options that we've not mentioned, Sarr seems to be getting some fairly sort of consistent returns. Again, like not sort of setting the world alight, but getting single digit returns, 8 points here, 6 points there, a 4-pointer against Wolves last week. So not the end of the world. So I do think there's potential there with him. And then look, there's so many options that you could go for. It seems to be that breakout position this year. which I think is quite nice actually to have that option. Just given that at some point, during this year, we're going to see Haaland and Salah in the same teams probably. One that I am keeping my eye out on is Alex Scott from Bournemouth. I think once his minutes become a bit more secure throughout the season, I think they will generally over time. I think he could be a really good option. And then one that I'm sort of looking at in a bit of a cheaper price bracket than 5 million at 4.5 is Josh King of Fulham. On the eye test, he is looking very good. The stats do deceive because, of course, the big chance he had against Aston Villa to the penalty shout, his shot off of a potential handball, the disallowed goal against Chelsea. You don't see those in the stats, and he has looked very, very good in all the games that he's played. So for me, he is potentially sort of even better value than those 5 million midfielders. But again, because of the small sample size, one of these players, I guarantee in this list, will break out to be far better than the others. James Garner, on the face of it, looks to be that player. But again, we're going to have to see, because a lot of these players are playing for teams that aren't traditionally that consistent in FPL anyway. So yeah, out of all those 5 million midfielders, my favourite's 4.5.
Indeed, Josh King's a lovely little asset, and probably been quite unlucky, to be fair, so far this season. Like you mentioned, with the goal disallowed against Chelsea, could have easily come away with a haul against Villa on another day. So yeah, really nice option as well. Clean sheet odds then for the week. We've had a few people asking about these. You can usually get them on Twitter. There's multiple accounts that share them, and they usually change throughout the week as well. So that's something to bear in mind, that when you're seeing this on Tuesday or Wednesday when this goes out, they'll probably be updated by Friday anyway. So yeah, obviously Arsenal lead the way as expected. The best defence in the league, facing a pretty poor West Ham side, although I was quite impressed with how they played in that second half against Everton on Monday night. They looked a lot, I guess, fresher. I don't know if that's a good word to use, but they just looked better than what they did under Potter. Aston Villa are second on the list. Do not be fooled into that. I'm a big advocate for not going for Aston Villa defender, and that's proven to be right so far this season with their expected goals conceded. Obviously, Burnley, do you back Anthony? Maybe he could get a goal against Aston Villa. I could see that happening. Man United also do not back them in a clean sheet, because they are absolutely terrible defensively at the moment. So yeah, I think 2 of the top 3 I probably wouldn't go for. Newcastle, though, they're the second best defence in the league for expected goals conceded. 40% chance of a clean sheet isn't too bad. It'll be interesting to see how they line up long term as well for Newcastle, because I'll see that Livramento injury, it's going to change how they play in that back 4. Anyone else, Ben, on that list that you think maybe should be a little bit higher?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, you look at that Everton Crystal Palace game, and a lot of managers will be going towards those Crystal Palace assets, and at 31%, they could be a little bit under the radar, especially with Dewsbury Hall being out suspended now for that game. That's a little bit less creativity potentially in that team. So I do think there could be potential value in one of those 2 teams in getting a clean sheet, potentially even both. You never know. So yeah, I think Newcastle, given they're the best defensive team so far in the league at 40%, seems to be sort of fairly likely. But yeah, like it is interesting sort of how it looks this week. Of course, Bournemouth at 36% bodes quite well for those who have jumped on Senesi as well, because yeah, Fulham at home seems on the face of it a fairly decent fixture.
Yeah, indeed. Fulham obviously without a recognised striker at the time recording. Raul Jimenez obviously picked up that injury against Villa. Muniz has been confirmed out for a couple of weeks at least, I think, with a muscle problem. Looking into captaincy then, it's a big week for captaincy just because there's quite a few options that you could potentially go for. There's obviously one standout as always, and it's Erling Haaland at the minute. He's got Brentford away this week, which I don't think is too bad of a fixture. It all depends how they sort of play it. It's going to be quite game state dependent, I think, and depending on how many returns he comes away with. I think I can easily see him scoring a goal. It's just whether he gets that haul, which obviously is what you want with your captaincy. Bruno Fernandes comes just behind with Sunderland at home, which is obviously expected given it's a newly promoted side. His routes to points are still good. I know a lot of people are sort of turning their nose off of him, not rating him after that penalty miss again. Trust me, I know it's been pretty painful so far this season. But yeah, I think he's still a good asset, and I still think he'll keep penalties. I don't think he'll lose them anytime soon, just because of the circumstances around him missing. They're not excuses, but when he's having to wait 5 minutes to take a penalty, I think you can give him a bit of a slack on that one. Saka's next against West Ham. I don't mind the idea of captaining an Arsenal attacker against West Ham this week. They've conceded a lot of goals, especially from set pieces, and obviously Bukayo Saka will be taking some of those from the right-hand side. And then, yeah, as you can see, Salah and Watkins round off the list with, I would say, probably suboptimal. There's definitely cons and weaknesses to go with those captaincy picks if you're going to go with them. Obviously, the three above are definitely more standout than those guys. Is there anything you want to add, Ben? I presume you'll be on Erling Haaland this week.
Yeah, I'm on Erling Haaland at the moment. I think that looks to be sort of the best fixture for FPL and the most obvious one. Again, I agree with you. Don't mind the captaincy of an Arsenal player. The only thing you'd be wary of is that new manager bounce, which can happen. And we've seen West Ham play. It's really chalk and cheese. West Ham at the Emirates. They're either on it and
lost there in 2 years, I think,
and really well, yeah. Or we've seen them capitulate at other teams. So yeah, we'll have to wait and see. The record, yeah, is pretty good, like you said. Yeah, Bruno Fernandes. I mean, the routes to points are still there. They're not going to change based off of a couple of game weeks where he's not quite performed to the standard. I think it's a bit of a risk with those that are going to be rage transferring him out. It might just be worth holding him as a normal player and captaining someone else. So yeah, for me, standout is Haaland, and then the rest of them below are low owned enough that you don't have to captain them to get a rank game.
Yeah, indeed. It seems fairly straightforward when you break it down this week. Last thing before the questions, then, we're going to be discussing mine and Ben's top 3 Arsenal assets. This is the best entry point for them going into this week with West Ham at home. The fixture run for a fairly sustained amount of time is pretty good. So having 3 of them is probably going to be advised from ideally this week, but if not, in the near future. So yeah, we'll start off with the easy one. You're going to want a defender. For me, Gabriel does lead that just because of the attacking threat. I know, obviously, it's easy to say after he just scored from a corner, but in general, his attacking threat is better than the rest of them, despite, obviously, Timber and Calafiori picking up some of those returns earlier in the season. I personally would steer clear of the fullbacks just because the rotation is just going to happen at some stage. They've got so many options, and that's what you've got to be careful of. It wouldn't even shock me if Saliba or Gabriel missed the odd Premier League game here or there if they had a tougher Champions League tie. So, yeah, by all means, they're not nailed, but I think Gabriel is probably the most nailed given the circumstance. Saliba's been picking up a couple of injuries and problems, so he'd probably be second. And then it's, sort of pick what you want from those fullbacks. Is there anything else that you'd add on the defender, Ben?
Yeah, for defenders, I'd say, yeah, the fullbacks are likely to be rotated in that easier run of fixtures for Arsenal. So that's one to be aware of. Like, a lot of Arsenal players are saying Lewis Skelly should be getting more minutes in the Premier League, and Calafiori playing is fantastic because he's cut price option, but that is for a reason, and we know eventually they will get rotated in and out. The most secure for me is definitely Gabriel. I think he's head and shoulders above all Arsenal defensive assets in terms of minutes, barring, of course, David Raya. So I do think it's between those two as my third favourite asset to go for Arsenal.
Yeah, indeed. I think David Raya, if you're struggling, if you're looking at a fullback and you're trying to pick them up, I'd 100% go for David Raya instead. The minutes are going to be there every week. You're not going to have to worry about that. He isn't going to pick up defcons and too many saves, but I think he will be a solid asset overall. So yeah, for me, David Raya is probably my second. I personally would go double defence just because of how good their defence is. They've been so solid so far this season. I think they've conceded 3 big chances in the opening 6. So yeah, really decent so far. Sorry, the dog's just barged in. This guy.
Oh, hello. It's just charged in.
To the YouTube video. Okay, then little dog introduction there. But yeah, overall, first of all, it will be Gabriel. Second, I think me and Ben are pretty decisive on the fact that David Raya is the second best route into the defence, and offers sustainability in a position that's been quite hard to find that so far in the FPL this season, obviously in between the sticks. And then the third asset is obviously going to be an attacker. Me and Ben are very divided on this so far this season. I'll go first, and I think that Victor Gyökeres, for me, is the better attacker, just because he's spearheading the attack. He's been pretty decent at home so far. He's only blanked the once at home, and that was against Manchester City. Obviously, it's a small sample size that we're seeing from him. Obviously, the more games that he plays, I think the more used to the system he's going to become. We think, it's not confirmed yet, but we've had a source from Sweden who broke the deal for Gyökeres to Arsenal say that he is the confirmed penalty taker, and that was decided in pre-season. And obviously the only penalty they've had, Saka hasn't been on the pitch, so that is quite annoying. So it's sort of up in the air still, which is maybe another reason to wait if you wanted to on an Arsenal attacker. But for me, I think if I had to say who's going to take penalties for Arsenal, it would be Victor Gyökeres as it stands. And yeah, obviously he's leading the line for that Arsenal team, which will obviously score goals. Go on, Ben. You're going to be talking about Bukayo Saka.
Yeah, I am opting for Bukayo Saka as my top Arsenal asset. I do believe in terms of attacking returns, he will match Gyökeres for those attacking returns, whilst getting more points per goal, which I think is going to be very important, as well as that additional clean sheet point that he will get throughout the season for Arsenal's defensive performances. So I do think, Gyökeres is a decent option. I do sort of leaned more towards Saka for, the reasons being that, we're going to see same amount of goals and assists. We're going to see more points per goal. We're also seeing him on, set pieces, and he's been part of that Arsenal system for years. We've got years worth of data that shows he's an elite FPL asset. I'm not saying that Gyökeres isn't going to be an elite FPL asset, but we've had a very, very small sample size where we've seen him struggle a little bit more against those better defences. And, we've not seen great sort of data come from that. But we have seen him be a little bit of a flat track bully so far against those weaker teams. So for me, we see a little bit more consistency from Saka, particularly against the better teams. So for me, that's why I'm leaning a little bit more towards him. But again, I don't actually think there's going to be too much in it.
Yeah, indeed. It's going to be interesting. Obviously, you could go for both and then just go for the one defender, but then you're probably going to be behind, if I'm being honest, on the effective ownership of Arsenal clean sheets, because I imagine most will be having two of them. Obviously, we'll have to wait and see the more we go into their fixture run. On to the questions now then. We've got 4 for this week. Charles asked, is it worth moving Salah to Haaland? There was lots of likes on this comment as well, like at least 20, which was surprising because I feel like last week was the week to do that, obviously with that Burnley fixture, and then obviously Salah going away to Palace is not an easy game. So what would you say, Ben? Obviously, if they've missed that boat of the Burnley game for Haaland, is it still worth doing that move, or do you think maybe the boat's passed?
I don't think the boat's going to pass really with Haaland, just given the form that he is in. Like, City's fixture run is decent now, so it's not too bad. So I would be looking at ways that you could fund a move to get Haaland in. And look, Salah, you can probably not own for the next, 5 to 7 game weeks maybe. And look, you can reassess how Liverpool are playing after that point.
Yeah, indeed. Boulevardi's brought up the good old question that we just discussed of Saka or Gyökeres. For me, what I would add on to that part that we just spoke about is it depends on your team as well. Like if you've got 3 other strikers that you really want, say Haaland, say João Pedro, say Jarrod Bowen after this Arsenal game, for example, then there's always that chance that you could just go for Saka and it will be an easier route into that Arsenal attack from the midfield. And likewise, if you're happy with your midfield, then by all means get Gyökeres. It could be down to your team structure as well. And also maybe you've got a more expensive forward and you can do it in 1 free transfer rather than 2, things like that. So it's all very dependent. Ben's very much Saka, I'm very much Gyökeres. I'm sure it will be pretty much even, to be honest, by the time we come to the end of it. So yeah, just choose your poison as you wish. Julius Ard says worth using the wild card this week. You got any tips on that, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it feels a week too early. I never like wildcard in a week before an international break, and that holds a lot of risk with doing so. So for me, I feel like it's a week too early if you're thinking of hitting that chip. Definitely more beneficial over an international break, especially with sort of more price rises and price falls over that time. So for me, a week too early, despite sort of the fixtures turning for City and Arsenal now going into the next few weeks. If you can get away with sort of the sort of minimal assets in terms of Arsenal and City, then try and sort of hold that off one more week, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'd 100% agree with that. It's always nice to wildcard over the international breaks. You can catch price rises, you can assess injuries, which is usually a problem when we go into the international break. A lot of the South American players are playing friendlies. They're going to be sort of hoax injuries, as we say, because they're probably not that injured, but they're just not going to travel all that way to play some friendlies. So, yeah, it's much better saving it for next week if you can get through this week. And the final question then, hold or sell Bruno? I'll let Ben answer this first because I'm obviously a little bit biased being a United fan, and then I'll put my take on it up at the end.
For me, I see him as a hold for one more week. And look, the fixture against Sunderland is probably too good to ignore, in my opinion, just because of, how we've sort of perceived those sort of teams that go up in the past. So for me, I'd definitely look at holding this week and then reassessing over that international break period where, we will be able to sort of make a bit more of a clearer judgment on it. I think if you own him, you keep him. If you don't own him, you maybe sort of avoid buying this week for me. So Josh, what's your biased view on it?
Yeah, indeed. I think your advice is fairly sound, to be honest. Sunderland fixture, you definitely shouldn't be selling him for. Like I mentioned, I wouldn't be taking too much away from anyone's defensive data too much to start the season. Yes, Sunderland have been impressive, but it's still a newly promoted side to the Premier League, and they haven't faced the top opposition. Sunderland have had one of the best fixture runs going into the season, so you'd expect them to do relatively well. I wouldn't expect them to be finishing fourth at the moment, but it is, you take it as it is. And obviously they did lose to Burnley, which is even more remarkable that they're in the position where they are. So that's the first thing. I think overall with Bruno Fernandes, it's a bit like Man United. It's just very polar opposite. One week it's very good, one week it's the worst. Like, there's no in between. So yeah, for me, on another day, he's got 20 plus points so far this season, got 4 double-digit hauls out of 6 games. Like, we're talking about an elite FPL asset if he's done that, and if he's just converted 2 penalties, it's not I think crazy. So yeah, for me, he's a definite hold. Definite hold for Sunderland. I think you could even make a case for holding him for the long term as well. I know the Liverpool fixture is not ideal, but United went there and drew there with Ruben Amorim last season, so it's not as if they've been smacked about like they were, a couple of years ago. So yeah, for me, I think it's a hold for the Sunderland game. You can then reassess if someone breaks out as an asset in that midfield spot, that you can use the funds like a Bukayo Saka, a Cole Palmer, etc. He's also very good for that in terms of being able to move from him to a more premium asset later down the line. Okay then, so that wraps up the Game Week guide for Game Week 7. Obviously, it's the last week before another international break, and then we'll get into the thick of it with the winter football coming on. Hopefully you guys are set up well for Game Week 7. Let us know if you've got any questions in the comments.
Yeah, absolutely. And as always, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe to the FPL Graduates. I've been Ben.
I've been Josh.
And we'll see you guys
next time. Have a good game week, everyone.